So we told you a couple weeks ago the Saints need to take an offensive tackle in the NFL draft. The odds will tell you the Saints are going to take an offensive tackle in the NFL draft. Even the mock drafts agree that the Saints are going to take an offensive tackle. So today on the Saints Insider, we try to figure out which offensive tackle the Saints should take in the NFL draft. We're breaking down the big boys on the Saints Insider for Wednesday, April the 17th. I'm Zach Ewing. That's Matt Paras, Luke Johnson, Jeff Duncan, and another NFL draft show. Welcome back, Luke.
Hey, thanks.
You spent the week in Wisconsin like drinking beer and eating cheese, or what?
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. And then I'm taking off later again this week to go run a marathon in Utah, which is just the dumbest idea I've ever had.
You should flip the order of those two around, probably.
Yeah. So like my marathon training just went completely in the toilet, but it was a good time. Ate a lot of cheese. I had a couple Butterburgers. I had 3 Butterburgers in a week. For those who know, you know. They're good, baby.
Yeah. A little different kind of marathon you had last week.
Yeah, that's right. So
Norm's giving you the thumbs up.
Yeah. I'm just hoping you guys don't have to hold a memoriam show for me next week. We'll see that.
Marathon at altitude, no less.
At altitude with hills. Dumbest thing I've ever done.
Are you going to wear a
we should go record
or singlet or anything? Do we have that? We got that.
We got to talk to John George's.
Ryan Lips will hook us up with that. Logo extra large.
We'll go
have a bunch of logos.
We'll go record out in Utah and have a post-game marathon. You finish the race,
drag
then
my
you do a
corpse
pod. You do 2 marathons.
Drag my corpse up to the camera. You can Mr. Bernie me.
We'll get a cot for Luke. All right. Well, we're going to talk offensive tackles today. I want to let you know this season's NFL draft coverage is brought to you by Tulane Doctors. Now at East Jefferson General Hospital, Tulane Doctors are bringing academic medicine to more patients in new communities. Look for the shield to know the future of medicine is here. Find your physician at TulaneDoctors.com or call 504-988-5000. So basically, I was looking at the odds. The Saints are like minus 300 to pick an offensive tackle in the first round. I mean, for those who don't know, that implies like a 75% chance. That's really high for any team to be locked into any position who's not like picking number one. We did our mock draft a couple weeks ago. We'll do another one next week. I mean, I think we all think this is going to be the position. It's not impossible they could go elsewhere. It's not impossible something could change. But Matt, like this is as clear of a positional need as you'll ever see a team. And then it's also a strength in the draft.
It is. And you look at the draft order ahead of them, 4 quarterbacks likely to go in the top 10. There's that run of receivers that could start, 3 stud receivers. And so you're just kind of playing the math game. There's a good chance that a tackle value will be there waiting for them at 14. And it just depends on which of these guys that they like. And we don't know necessarily for sure, but we have some guesses. And I think, as we were talking last week, Fashanu is really the home run. This would be great if they landed him.
Yeah, and Luke, you spent a lot of time looking at these tackles individually and the prospects of strengths and weaknesses of each one. We're going to do that, but it can be hard for someone who's not a scout and doesn't understand offensive line footwork and handwork and all those things to parse. Okay, why is this guy just a little bit better than this guy or a little bit different than that guy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really, really hard position to evaluate, and that's why I think you see when you see a guy who is kind of clear cut as like a dude, that's why you see him go in the top 10 and the top 15 of the draft, because it's with a lot of them it's projecting. It's you don't see them go up against NFL caliber pass rushers, so you have to kind of project. It's hard. It's hard, especially if you're just a football fan who's not like a film guru to really parse the difference between a really good offensive tackle and a decent offensive tackle and a bad offensive tackle. It's not quite the same as seeing a guy run away from other people with a ball in his hands. So, and adding to the little complexity with the Saints here is that we don't know exactly what they're looking for. They have a whole new offensive coaching staff. That maybe the stuff that mattered to them in the past doesn't matter to them as much now. And maybe the stuff that we're all thinking like, hey, this is what they look for and this is what they need. They're like, we actually need this. It's something completely different than what you're thinking. So it's a really interesting situation to be in for the Saints right now. It's interesting to try to figure out what they're thinking. But I still think that you look at what this team needs, and it is such a glaring hole what they have on their roster currently that it just feels like there's no other way this can go unless somebody's there who they're really not expecting to be there.
Yeah, and you look at like to Matt's point, the way the draft is gonna fall, it looks like these tackles should kind of all be there, at least the secondary tier. I think presuming Joe Alt's going to go number 1.
Yep.
It looks like it's falling perfect for them, that one of those guys should be there at 14, in that group. And to Luke's point, we don't know exactly what the Saints want, but I think these guys are close enough in probably grade that they'll be happy with any of those. I think maybe next 3 that are on the board, most boards we see. There might be a little difference between each one, but they're going to get probably a starting caliber day 1 guy if they stay at 14.
Yeah, and one of the really interesting things too is, I mean, there could be 5 quarterbacks off the board before the Saints pick. Yeah, I think there's that 11, 12, 13 range right before the Saints pick. All 3 of those teams, could, if they're not trading up, could conceivably stay where they're at and take somebody like Michael Penix or Bo Nix.
Michael Penix to the Raiders has become a really popular.
Yeah.
Really?
That's neat. Yeah. Which would be good for the Saints because the Raiders are another team that have been popularly linked to offensive tackles. So, yeah, they could. It is totally conceivable that Joe Alt could be the only tackle off the board by the time the Saints come around at 14. And they could have their choice of all these guys. Or if the Saints are so sold on Joe Alt being like a future, like all-pro, long-time stalwart left, it's conceivable they could try to trade up for him.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you can just dismiss the possibility that he is completely out of the grass. It'd take a lot, but the Saints are a team that has been willing in the past to trade future draft assets, current draft assets, and whatever is on the table to go get the guy they want.
We talked about trade possibilities on Friday's pod, and I think we all think it's probably wiser and maybe even more likely, even for this franchise to trade back, and that's because maybe 4 of these guys are available at 14, and if you not sure you really prefer one over the other 3, then maybe you can trade back to 18 and still pick one of them up. So that's a possibility. But we do have Joe Alt on the list just for that reason. They could go up to 10 and get him if he's still there, or 8 or whatever it might be. So a lot of possibilities. We're going to dig into the top 6 most likely tackles the Saints could take in the first round. I did want to go back. I forgot to mention this. Our NFL draft giveaway. Just be subscribed to the Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel and leave 2 comments on 2 separate videos. One comment on 2 separate videos is what I mean. Between April the 10th and April the 25th. They're all draft previews, and our live draft show on April the 25th will be the last one. 2 comments, subscribe to the channel, you're eligible. We have a couple of different packages of Saints Insider swag with the logo Jeff loves, and also with the books Jeff loves that he wrote, and he'll sign them for you. So we'll get those giveaways out in the mail, probably the week after the draft. So look into that. All right. We're going to start with a guy that you mentioned, Matt, and it's probably the most likely. I looked at 15 mock drafts. I actually put the results on NOLA.com/Saints. 15 different mock drafts of who they have the Saints taking, and I think 8 of them had Fashanu, the Penn State offensive tackle, which is a huge consensus for mock drafts at 14. I mean, you don't see more than half of mock drafts pick any player to any team outside the top 10. So Fashanu is obviously the chalk choice. What do people see in him for the Saints?
Yeah, it's really kind of clear cut because a lot of the other guys will dive into, they're a lot more of a right tackle, and Fashanu is kind of the second regarded left tackle right behind Joe Alt. Now, some teams may have Fashanu ahead of Alt. We don't know that, but for the Saints, it makes sense because this guy is really solid in pass protection. That's the main selling point. He also has those other intangibles that they love: team captain, All-American. He's a really good high, athleticism's off the charts, but really he's just sound technique-wise, good athlete. And I always try and compare him to Trevor Penning because I think there's lessons in the Penning miss at this point of, maybe he was a little too aggressive or raw coming out of college. And it just seems like Fashanu doesn't have those concerns as much. And so I think he's a clear-cut choice, especially because of the left tackle element. I think maybe you could draft a JC Latham and maybe convert him to left and he'd be fine. But I just, if you're the Saints, you need kind of that safe. We've used the double analogy before on this show. You just need someone to kind of lock down that spot. I think he's the best bet there if he is there.
I see. We talk about safe. His last year at Penn State, 365 snaps, 0 sacks allowed. So the guy got the job done on the field.
0 sacks allowed in his entire college career. And he played every single snap of his college career for the snaps he was on the field at left tackle. It's outside of Joe Alt, who I think played some I think he played like some tight end at Notre Dame.
He started there.
I mean, everybody else you're looking at is like right tackle, played some guard. I think there's a benefit to that when you have a guy who you know is going to be a left tackle, and there's no real worry about projection there. That's where he's going to belong in the NFL, and if he plays up to his potential, which I think he's like a high floor, high ceiling guy to me. If he plays up to potential, you could have a multiple Pro Bowl left tackle. Those are incredibly valuable, especially for a quarterback like Derek Carr, who plays a lot better. Like all quarterbacks, plays a lot better when he's not under pressure. But for him, it's big gaps. When you start getting a lot of blindside pressures and pressure, generally speaking, his play suffers. And if you start to shore that up, we saw in the last 4 games of the season how good he can be. So, I know they have questions at both tackle spots right now, and getting somebody who plays right tackle is not a bad thing. But man, that position is so valuable. You see it in the way these guys are paid in the NFL. Left tackles make more money than any other offensive line position, and it's for a reason. We've gone over all the reasons why I personally like this guy. He checks every single box the Saints look for. Super intelligent player, well-regarded player in the locker room, team MVP last year along with Chop Robinson. Super productive, plays a position. He's going to be a 21-year-old rookie for most of his rookie season. I just think it's clear-cut for me. It's obvious.
Jeff, you're always railing against groupthink, and a lot of people are saying Fashanu's the guy. So let's throw a little bit of water on why the Saints might not pick him. And the only thing I could really notice, and obviously Luke and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of the knocks against him is a little bit of technique, can be raw, his footwork, those sorts of things. And you think about that in a Clint Kubiak offense, would they want a guy who can move around a little bit more and block in space? That'll be the one weak point, I guess I would.
Yeah, but I think we're picking nits at this point. He, like Luke said, he checks almost every box the Saints look for for a prospect. I think the biggest question mark is he going to be there? Because I think a lot of other teams are going to look at the same thing with him and say, look, this guy is pretty much a sure thing. But the thing that stands out to me is his production and of all those intangible qualities they look for. But his production at the Big Ten level, that's a big Jeff Ireland thing. He likes guys that come from Power 5 schools that have practiced against elite players. He was probably practicing against Chop Robinson even when he wasn't in a game, so he was getting great training. He makes a lot of sense with his agility. He reminds me probably for viewers maybe of a Teron Armstead, an athletic left tackle, get out in space, can be very agile, and that's a big trait that Clint Kubiak and the Gary Kubiak offense, looks for. So he kind of checks all the boxes. The only thing I can think of is either he's going to be gone or they value maybe a more powerful run blocker. That's the only thing I can think of that would maybe vault one of these other guys like Latham or
Fuaga.
Fuaga ahead of him. That's the only thing I can think of. But I would be surprised if he's on the board. They don't take him.
That is the weakness in this game. If you're looking at what it and when we're saying weakness, we're talking about it's not at the same level as his other traits.
Relative weakness,
right? Yeah. But his run blocking probably needs some work in the NFL level. To be like really good. But I think all the traits are there. And, we've seen the Saints invest this offseason in the coaching staff, getting 2 very experienced, highly regarded offensive line coaches. I wouldn't be concerned about that if they drafted him 14th.
And look at like Armstead. When he came in from Arkansas Pine Bluff, they didn't have a great strength and conditioning program. It took him a few years to get up to standards of an NFL drive blocker. And that's probably the same thing with Fashanu. So, I mean, I don't think there's any concern with that. I mean, a lot of these guys come in the league and need a year or two in strength and condition. He's a guy that I think, like Luke said, has actually a lot of upside for a prospect as developed as he already is.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned Jeff Ireland wanting these. All 6 guys we're going to talk about are Power 5 or Notre Dame, competition. They played competition. I wonder if that belief was strengthened by what you were talking about with Penning coming in and saying, okay, we took a chance on a guy from a small school, and it, maybe the verdict isn't completely out yet, but so far it's blown up in our face.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about Penning too is he was regarded as like you can plug and play. He may not be the most like clean offensive lineman, but he should be able to come in right away and be your day one starter, and he wasn't that. So I do think you have to kind of look at these guys' weaknesses, like kind of scrutinize them and pick apart. But, that what is it, a Belichick thing of don't tell me what a guy can't do, but you got to tell him what he can do. And for Fashanu, there's just so many of what he can do. And that's why I think he's like the clear favorite of the non-alt linemen.
All right, we'll talk about another one. Next up on our list is Oregon State's Taliese Fuaga. Fuaga, a little bit more of like a brawler, he's described as. Luke, break down Fuaga's game for us.
Yeah, well, I think the one thing that jumps off the bat immediately is for all the good traits about him. He's a very aggressive offensive lineman. He's big. And he's like 6'5", 320,
324 is what he's listed at. Yeah,
and he's got the length that you like. He was an all-conference type of player, which the Saints like, but he played right tackle, and a lot of people are looking at him as maybe a guard in the NFL, and there's value to that for sure. There's value in having a guy who can play multiple positions. I mean, Andrus Peat did that for years in New Orleans, and he made $50 million on his second contract with the Saints. But I just think that knocks him down a peg for me below Fashanu's. Is just like if they need somebody to play left tackle, he's probably not your guy. So I mean, there are a lot of things to really like about him, and he may end up being a very, very good player, a Pro Bowl caliber player in the NFL. But it's just that positional uncertainty just kind of scares me off a little bit about him. I think I'd actually prefer another guy we're going to talk about later, and JC Latham over him, just because there's more of a kind of a clear vision of what he can be.
And this offensive line already, not always square pegs and round holes, but they have a lot of, like, let's say triangle pegs in round holes where they'll fit, but they're not perfect fits and they're moving them around. And a certain amount of versatility is good, but you also need some guys who are born to play that position.
Yeah, and I mean, like they've done this in the past. A couple of years ago, they drafted Cesar Ruiz, who was a college center, and they were like, well, we're going to probably start him at guard. We can see the traits where you can start at guard. And it was a big work in progress. That rookie year was rough for Ruiz. It's not the projection doesn't always work out that way. I think if you got a guy who is going to play one position, he's going to be good at that one position. I don't think the Saints would have to worry about Fashanu whether he could play right tackle, because he'd be their left tackle. With Fuaga, there's just an element of where does he best fit. It's good to be a jack of all trades sometimes, and that's, like I said, it's very valuable on the offensive line. But when you're talking about needing a guy to step in and lock down one position, that just scares me off a little bit.
Jeff, your thoughts on Fuaga?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of teams, and I've seen some guys, like, for instance, I was mentioning it before we came on air, former Saints general manager Randy Mueller, who have him ahead of Fashanu on their board. So I don't think it's locked down that Fashanu is the clear-cut number 2, but I think for the Saints situation, he definitely fits better. I'm not so much worried about the positional issue. Is more kind of some of the things Luke talked about with his aggressiveness and some of the things that start to remind me of Trevor Penning. Maybe yeah. I'm branded that way, but I think if you're picking between these two, I would definitely go Fashanu. But I'm concerned he's going to be off the board, and then it's going to come down to the decision between Latham and Fuaga. I think that's what the Saints are looking at, and then those guys are very similar in a lot of ways. But I would say this: I think both of them are going to be outstanding prospects. I don't think you can go wrong with any of these three that we're talking about.
Agreed.
I think they've got all these traits. I mean, Fuaga is also a guy that's very highly regarded in the locker room, team leader. So, all three of these guys, I think, are fit what the Saints need. There might just be a little bit more of a developmental curve with the other two than Fashanu.
And I kind of put these in random order, so we'll come back when we get to Latham later. We'll come back and compare him maybe to Fuaga if that is the choice. But Matt, give you a chance to talk on Fuaga.
Yeah, I talked with the Athletics' Dane Brugler early today, and I kind of asked him. I said, if Fashanu's gone, which of these right tackles do you think can maybe hold up the best at left, or what do you think is the best option there? And he actually said the Washington kid, Fautanu, because he played left tackle before Penix got there. I thought that was an interesting answer, but then he pivoted to Fuaga and said that he could be able to do it, but. The Saints also need a right tackle. If Ryan Ramchuk's knee's not going to be able to play. Like, I think maybe for this purpose of this conversation, we are maybe underrating that uncertainty there. And if he can't go, then maybe you do hope Trevor Penning develops into something and you have a glaring hole at right tackle. I thought Landon Young played well at stretches, at right tackle, to where if Ramchuk can't go, maybe that's not a terrible option. But I actually don't think using a first-round pick on a right tackle is a terrible idea, and if he can't move to left and has to play right, that's not the worst thing in the world given Ramchuk's. Like, if Ramchuk can play and this is his final season, then you have a future right tackle as well.
Yeah, and look, we're talking about a bad situation that the Saints are in,
yes.
right? So,
yes.
So I think that there's value in having a guy who can be a left tackle, because we've discussed why that position is so important. But they need tackles, period. So if a guy is going to be a right tackle in the pros, that's super valuable too. That's really valuable, and especially if you can keep Landon Young in a spot where he's a spot starter, a jumbo offensive lineman, a guy who's going to fill in a pinch. But like, if you have him out there for 17 games,
right,
especially given his injury history, you're just asking for major problems.
Let's pause just for a second, and this is probably something we can ask again after we see what the Saints do in the draft. But Andrus Peat still on the free agent market. Is he still a possibility for the Saints if they need another tackle?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a possibility, especially if the draft plays out in some crazy way and they end up with like Malik Neighbors. Like, do you pass on Malik Neighbors if he's somehow weirdly there at 14, or Roma Dunze, or somebody you're just completely not expecting to be there? Maybe not. And then you just figure out tackle. Like, that's not a spot where you want to be in, but there are still some options out there. They do still have some cap space. It's possible. It would be kind of a bummer for the Saints to be like, okay, we're basically paying Andrus Peat twice this year, because he's already counting $13 million against the salary cap and dead money. But he doesn't have a home yet. Same thing with some other guys out there. Mekhi Becton's had a really up and down career.
Hell's up.
But he's still out there. There's still was a guy from Washington.
Oh, Charles Leno.
Charles Leno's still out there.
Commander strength.
He's over there going.
We don't know about his hip, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That's the thing. Is like all the available options out there come with significant. I mean, Andrus Peat is probably the one out there. Andrus Peat, the one Saints fans could not stand for a long time.
He's your top option.
Your best option available out there, but it's doable. Like, you can still patch it up via free agency if you have to draft a right tackle and you still need a left tackle, or if something unexpected happens and you land a player that you're not expecting to be there at 14 and you don't draft a tackle in the first round. There's a lot of different ways you can do it still, but I think you're just there's a reason why you're talking about finding a long-term solution there, so you're not stuck back in the same position next year and the tackle class next year is not expected to be as good as the one this year.
Yeah, plan A, obviously, to draft at least one tackle. And by the way, we're just talking first round. I mean, they could go back and get another one later in the draft. They could even go, you wrote about the possibility of the Saints going back-to-back tackles at the top of the draft.
And I think the thing we also didn't talk about, Luke, you just kind of alluded to it, but guys get released after the draft. Like, that's how Washington landed Charles Leno in the first place, is because the Bears drafted Tevin Jenkins to be their left tackle of the future. He plays guard now. But they released Charles Leno and thought they were okay there, and then Washington signed Leno, and he ended up being a pretty solid signing for them. But so you never know who becomes available, but that's just not a plan you can count on. Like
Right.
that's why it makes sense to go tackle in the first round, is just because you know what's there, and it's just a lot easier to feel comfortable about it rather than crossing your fingers and hoping someone gets released because of salary cap purposes or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. All right, quickly, we don't need to spend a ton of time on him, but we do want to mention Joe Alt as a possibility in case he should fall, in case the Saints are just so in love with him they're willing to mortgage more future picks to get up to like 7 or so and take him. Joe Alt is 6'8", 321. Actually, yes, he's actually listed
He's
at
like 6'9", yeah.
He's a tall drink of water. Kind of known as the most pro-ready tackle, right? Like discipline, technique, and just kind of plug and play at left tackle.
Yes. Yeah, he would be, I think, widely considered the number one tackle in the draft for a lot of reasons. Norm is probably disagreeing with us, our producer back here.
Yeah, Norm played offensive line at Tulane. Did you play tackle, Norm, or did you play some tackle, guard and tackle, and does not like Joe Alt?
He likes Joe Alt.
Just not as much as everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, look, the thing with Joe Alt is he's huge, obviously, and he's got the length that goes along with that. But he's a guy who he played quarterback in high school. He played tight end in high school. He played tight end at Notre Dame. He's an athlete first and foremost. So he's huge, but he's nimble. And then you combine that with the strength and the technique. He's just an obvious. You drop him in there and you let him play, and he plays at a high level right away.
That's something Brugler highlighted, because I asked him what kind of separates all, and he threw some precaution of teams' draft boards vary from team to team. Some teams might have Fashanu number 2, but the reason why Alt is largely considered number 1 is because of that inexperience actually playing tackle, and he looks maybe like the most pro-ready. It's just that upside of, oh my God, if this guy's only been doing this for 3 years, then what's he going to be like when he has 10 under his belt? His upside is just, I think, a lot more. He's just an incredible athlete, and to have that upside with it is just, the Titans are going to be very happy if they pick him at 7.
I think the concern you hear sometimes is with a guy that tall. A lot of times, left tackles have to be able to bend and be athletic for obvious reasons, and you just don't see very many 6'8", 6'9" guys that have that athleticism. Now, that's what supposedly Alt has, but we were talking earlier, John Ogden's kind of the prototype there. Was incredible athlete, but I mean also very rare. I mean, the guy's a Hall of Famer, so it's hard to find a lot of guys that tall that can match up with the athleticism that they're going to face at the NFL level, and that's what scouts like about Alt. But I've seen some people concerned a little bit about that with him. So,
well, and the flip side of that is if he's got an 80-inch wingspan, you can imagine how hard that is for an edge rusher to get around.
Yeah, so, Randy Mueller talked about that. He said, we get evaluators get hammered all the time for talking about reach. He goes, but you have to understand, like, every inch matters at the NFL level with the reach, because that's further that the speed rusher has to go around the edge, and it's a big thing. He said each inch is huge for an offensive lineman, especially left tackle.
All right, moving on to our 4th offensive tackle prospect here on Saints Insider, brought to you by Tulane Doctors. It's Troy Fautanu of Washington, a little bit shorter, 6'4", 317, kind of your more typical tackle size. Known as an aggressive tackle, exceptional footwork. What else can you tell us about Fautanu?
Yeah, I played a lot of football at Washington. Played some left tackle there, and as Matt alluded to, went to the right side with Michael Penix there, because Michael Penix is a left-hander, so he's protecting his blind side over there. Very, very solid player. I think out of all the guys we're talking about, he probably has like maybe the lowest ceiling but like you could probably drop him in and feel very comfortable with where he's at. Yeah, I think he would be like a like a slide in double, you know. Yeah. Not a stand up double, but still like a very safe pick. But he's another guy that we're talking about where, and really because of the size that you alluded to, 6'4", 317, probably will belong one day at guard. And I think even Dane Brugler had him as a guard in his preview. So there's a little bit of risk there if you're taking him to be a tackle. And then, he just doesn't have the size to match up out there. And you end up having to shift him into guard. But he's a really good athlete. I think he was another one of those guys who scored like a 9-something on the relative athletic score. There was a lot of them in this class. Basically, everybody we're talking about, except for JC Latham, who didn't test. All of them have the athletic traits that you want. It's just for Fautanu, it's a matter of the size, which I think kind of limits his ceiling and what he can be.
Yeah, we've seen some draft prospects who were projected as tackles and then ultimately had to kick into guard. Yeah, the Northwestern
Even
kid
last year.
Yeah.
Peter Skoronsky, who's the first offensive lineman taken, ended up playing guard his rookie season.
Yeah, Brandon Sheriff's another. It just that is kind of a. But also, I wonder how much of that is situation where the teams draft him, and I know the Titans need a tackle now, but maybe they had a bigger hole at guard. You just never know, and the Saints maybe have some more leeway to try him at tackle and to have him develop because they are kind of set at guard, at least right now. So, I don't think it'd be a terrible pick, but I do think there are actual legitimate concerns of whether he's better suited for guard.
Yeah.
Fatanu, Duncan. I know this is confusing with the Fs, man. Fatanu, Fuaga, and
3 Fs.
Fashanu.
Yeah, we're getting our pronunciations down.
We
a
talked
month
about
ago
it.
we were struggling. Now we got it.
So
No,
many-
look,
Don't ask me to pronounce the BYU tackle's name.
Yeah, no, that's the
Or
one.
Olu's full first name. He's Olu.
That's why we go with Olu.
No. Yeah,
Olu.
I totally messed it up. Go on.
Anyway,
No, look,
Fatanu. Yeah.
I mean, look, I think everything's been said about him. I mean, he played at the Power 5 school, the high level, productive. But I think Saints fans would be very disappointed if it came down to that. I think that's the kind of guy you take if all the other ones are off the board. He's a safe pick, but if I were the evaluator and he was the one there, I would be looking to trade down. That would be what I would do because I think you could get another guy that would be very similar grade. But I think it's all the 3 we talked about and then a gap.
Okay. Well, played in the Sugar Bowl.
And Pac-12 does. I mean, and Washington in particular played a lot of really good teams this year. Yeah, Pac-12 has some good edge rushers.
Yeah.
And Latu, is going to be a first-round pick. Like he's definitely got like the skins in the wall. It's just, when you have him going up against T.J. Watt or
Right.
these like superior NFL edge rushers. That's I think where you could see that his limitations get exposed at the NFL level.
Okay, so let's move on to a guy we mentioned a couple times throughout the show today, JC Latham of Alabama. These last 2 that we have are the biggest guys. Latham 6'6", 342, just a mammoth wall out there. Can play right tackle or left tackle. Lots to like here.
I love JC Latham. I think for me, if it's not Fashanu, it's Latham. Like if I were making the decision, but like the risk here with him, and this is like we talked about a lot with these guys, is he was right guard or right tackle. He played exclusively on the right side in college. He played a lot of football at Alabama. His freshman year, he wasn't a starter, but he was in the rotation there. He was their jumbo offensive lineman. Played a lot at right guard, and then the last 2 years, he was a starter at right tackle. He's fun. Like offensive linemen are rarely described as like fun to watch, but like I mean, he played at 360 for his last year at Alabama. He showed up at 360, and he was just like ragdolling guys. It's actually fun watching his cut-ups, his highlights, where he's just pancaking guys left and right because he's huge. And then on top of that, not only is he big, like girth-wise, weight-wise, but like mean, we talk about wingspan. He had like almost an 85-inch wingspan, like a Victor Wembanyama wingspan, and then he's got like 11-inch hands, which is stupid. Olu Fashanu, he has 8.5-inch hands. People are like, ooh, hands, whatever. I don't think it's a big deal, but like 11-inch hands.
And that's very small.
I might have
cutting
like
that clip
5-inch hands.
But that's small for a tackle.
It is.
It's
It
very
is.
small.
But like, all the other measurements, I'm not worried about Olu Fashanu's hands. But like JC Latham's got, he's got to wear like 5X gloves or something like that, and he uses those to his benefit. Like his punch is insane.
He's run blocking is like
an incredibly strong player. Yes, and that's the thing. And he's said that he wants to play left tackle. He wants to prove to teams he can play left tackle. I think we didn't see him test at the combine, so we don't know his scores. But like everything that's ever been said about him is that he's a freak athlete. Because I read a AL.com story about when he was signed. He was the number 1 offensive lineman in the signing class, a consensus 5-star. And his legend started when he was growing up in Wisconsin, and there's a basketball game going on, and everybody's attention is diverted to a side gym because he's throwing down these huge dunks as an 8th grader.
Wow.
So I don't think the athleticism is a question. I think he has that to play left tackle, but it is a projection because you've never actually seen it outside of when he was at IMG Academy. So I love him as a player. I still think I'd prefer Fashanu over him, but I think if if the Raiders take Fashanu right before the Saints come on the board and Latham's still available, I wouldn't feel bad about Latham being there.
So this is a situation of the head says Fashanu, but the heart says JC Latham.
Well, I could talk to him about Wisconsin stuff too, so that's always fun.
You also, he's one of these guys, Matt, where if you're one of the people who likes to watch YouTube highlights or you put together the clips NFL.com, you can lose yourself in a JC Latham hole for a while just watching him play.
Absolutely. And, you think about what the Saints struggled with last year in the run game. A lot of their linemen didn't get to that second level that so desperately needed to, create those holes. And I think he's a guy that would come in and solve that problem. It's easy to see that athleticism. Now, some of the weaknesses you read about kind of do scare me, to be honest, that, he doesn't have the best eyes for pre-snap recognition and can get lost on like twists and stunts. Seeing what happened with Penning scares me off. And I don't know if it's necessarily I'm just seeing what happened to Penning and I get nervous based on that. But I think that's the thing with Latham that I worry about. I think he'd still be a good pick. I just don't know if he's day one ready as much. Maybe you pick Latham and he can't play left, but then he sits behind Ramczyk if Ramczyk's able to go. We could talk about whether that'd be a good use of resources, but I actually think development in his case would be a good thing.
Jeff, you talked about the scenario that if Fashanu and Alt are both gone, it comes down to, for you, Fuaga versus Latham. So talk about that comparison.
Yeah, well, look, I think we've talked about this a little bit about Ramczyk's situation. I think we have to look at, and I think the Saints probably are looking at this as Ramczyk maybe has one more year. So if they get a right tackle, they need a right tackle because I don't know if Ramczyk is even going to play this year or ever again. Mm-hmm. So I think they have to look at it like we need a right tackle just as much as a left tackle. And Latham is – there's something to be said about a guy that was the number 1 recruit that comes into a power program like Alabama and dominates and starts very young. I know that's stuff Jeff Ireland really values is you come in with these expectations, you're at the premier program in college football, and you step right in. I don't think he'll have trouble adjusting to the next level at all, but I think we're all getting branded by Trevor Penning's. Yeah. You know what I mean? We're all like, oh my God.
I'll fully admit it.
I know.
Seeing his weaknesses does scare me off.
I agree.
For
agree,
what
but, and to your point earlier about small school, I don't think that's an issue. The Saints have had great success with small school guys on the offensive line in particular. Jamon Bushrod, Jari Evans, a Hall of Famer, or Teron Armstead. So I think one guy, we can't worry about that. But I think they'd be fine with any of those guys. And I think I'm like Luke. I think Latham would be my number 2 pick behind Fashanu, but I think they'll be fine with any of those guys if they can get them.
Side note about JC Latham, he self-dubbed himself TK, which is an acronym for Trench King. which I love.
And he
So
embraces it.
What
It's
I
not
need,
to come.
what I need is Taysom Hill running behind Binky, running behind TK
Oh, God.
on the goal line.
Do we need that?
Yes, we
I think
need
we
that.
need it.
Kinda need it. All right.
I mean, you know.
I just think
Wants,
I think the
needs.
Saints just need to get better on the offensive line. So any of these guys we're talking about is going to help them.
Yes.
You know, I know it's the purpose of this pod to, you know, to pick the nits of these guys and really break it down. But like, you know, you see Andrus Peat go out and play left tackle last year. He played guard almost his whole career. He used to be a left tackle, and they survived just fine. You know, really good athletic lineman will be fine. You know, it's not going to be a complete breakdown if JC Latham has to play left tackle. You know, it's not quite that of a stark contrast.
No, I don't think there should be any of these guys where fans go, oh, no. You know, like any of these guys would be fine. The last guy I want to talk about, and he's probably a little bit lower on most boards, and so this would be more of a situation where if they don't really like Fautanu and he's the only one there at 14, or they really like, and it's Amarius Mims of Georgia, who's 6'8", 340, didn't play a lot because of injury in college career. Maybe they feel like we could go back 4 or 5 spots, pick up an extra, you know, late second, early third rounder maybe, and still get Mims. He's a guy who's like a freak athlete and has a high ceiling and everything. You just don't know because he doesn't have the experience in college that these other guys do.
Yeah, 8 starts in college. That's scary. No matter what.
The photo I have of him is from his pro day because there was nothing on the AP wire of action.
Yeah. And I mean, some of those starts, I think he started 2 playoff games, and then he was locked in as their starting right tackle this year. And you know, he got, I can't even remember what the injury was for him. Do you remember, Matt?
I don't.
I think it was an ankle injury.
Yeah.
Ankle or knee.
Knocked him out for a good chunk of the year. So you just didn't see it. But what you do see is that he's huge and he moves like somebody who is much, much smaller. And that's something that we hear Jeff Ireland say all the time. You know, they're on the lookout for big guys who move like small guys. The line that he always says is like, God didn't put very many of these people on the earth. We're on the lookout for these guys. So yeah, I think there's a pretty clear distinction between him and the top tackles in the class, just on account of the experience and the playing time and seeing it happen. But man, like the potential there is just like oozing out of this guy. You'd have to probably coach it out of him, and you'd have to go through some growing pains. And you know, we're already talking about, you know, they have the high pick invested in Penning, and it hasn't worked out, and he's still on the roster. You know, they're still gonna coach him up and try to get it all out of him, and maybe it'll click for him. You just never know. But like, you know, he's like he would be like in the classic mold of the last like 5 years of Saints draft picks, where in the first round they'd be looking to hit a home run, and you know, they could swing and miss. But you know, I think the potential for him to be really, really good is there. And I think there's also potential that he slides out of the first round entirely. You know, maybe it becomes a little easier to trade up toward the top of the second round to get him. You know, I don't think it's likely, but I think it's possible. You could do the double dip like Matt wrote about, and get, you know, somebody who you know is going to be there and ready to play week 1, and then somebody who you can develop at another tackle position behind them.
And if you could get like a Latham and a Mims together,
wow, yeah,
you'd be adding a lot of talent potential.
And those O-line dinners would be sick.
Yeah, yes. The flip side, of course, Jeff, is like, I mean, the Saints, sure, you'd love to hit a home run. They can't swing and miss with this.
Right.
They cannot.
No, I don't think that's why I think Mims. The more I look at it, the more I think, and I'm going to write this column soon, so spoiler alert, but I think the trade down scenario is actually better suited in the second round for this team than the first round. I think because of their drastic need at tackle, the way the board's going to fall, the fact that some of these other tackles have some question marks like we've all talked about, I think they sit where they're at round 1. This draft could look a lot like 06, where they stayed put, took Reggie Bush, and then in the second round traded down and got Roman Harper, and that worked out pretty well. And I think that might be the way to go here, because I do think there's a few more question marks, and they cannot afford. they just can't afford to miss on this first round pick.
Any more thoughts on Mims, man? I mean, he's a guy, obviously only 8 starts, but if Georgia, of all programs, thought well enough of him when he was healthy to go plug him in and start in the playoff, obviously he's a talented guy. He's
just a guy that, like, we look at mock drafts all the time. I've seen him all over the place.
Yeah, I've seen him top 5.
I saw him, was it after the Senior Bowl, after the Combine?
After the Combine, after they put him at 5 to the
Chargers. And now we're talking him in the 20s if the Saints trade back. It's just, I really have no idea where he's going to go, and I kind of feel more comfortable with the other ranges. It's a very interesting prospect in that regard.
Just a volatile pick.
He's a lot like the guy we mentioned earlier, the Louisville guy, Mekhi Becton. Massive, athletic guy. You know, you draft on the ceiling, and he's had a bunch. Becton's had a ton of injuries, but like very similar, shoot for the stars kind of pick.
Okay, so we're going to talk, by the way, second round pick on Friday's pod, I think. Unless if you guys have a draft topic we haven't covered yet, you'd love to hear us talk about. We have like 2 more shows before the draft. Leave it in the comments. We'll consider them. But final thoughts here. Now that we've kind of dug into the details, and I know Luke and Matt, you guys have already, but anything different or anything change in your opinion that Olu Fashanu is probably the best fit, most likely to still be there, and the guy that in an ideal draft for the Saints is who they end up with?
No, I mean all the work I've done in the lead up to the draft has got me sold on him as the guy if he's there. It's just that, there's so much to like about him, and I would have a hard time passing up on what I feel like is as close as you're going to get in the draft to a sure thing at tackle, to kind of take a swing on some other traits of some of these other guys, even somebody like JC Latham, who I think could be a lot of fun. I just think there's so little chance that he comes in and just flames out and he's out of the league in 4 years, or he's bouncing around the NFL. Like he feels like a guy who's very safe to, at the very least, come in and be a starter throughout the length of his rookie contract, and maybe even a lot more than that.
The thing I worry about, Jeff really hit on it before, but I looked at Peter Schrager's mock draft today, and he's not like Dane Brugler, or he's not hammering on the draft, but he had Fashanu going to the Raiders. Mel Kiper, who is like that, I think also had Fashanu to the Raiders and Fuaga to the Saints. So, we talked earlier in the week or last week, about what teams ahead of the Saints would you worry about? And I actually think the Raiders, right ahead of them, are the team to watch for those.
You could worry about.
That was early in the week.
You could worry about the Chargers, the Titans. Wouldn't surprise me if the Bears took Olu Fashanu with their second pick in the first round, number 9. He is a high school teammate of Caleb Williams, after all, and getting somebody to protect the blind side of your franchise quarterback wouldn't be a surprise move. It wouldn't be a surprise to see the Raiders. I mean, there's
Jets.
Yeah, Jets. I mean, Jets just signed 2 offensive tackles this offseason, but one of them's played like 4 games in the last 2 years. So I just think that that as much as we're talking about there's going to be 4 quarterbacks and 3 wide receivers taken, and that leaves 6 picks for the other.
Yeah.
However many positions that you got to fill on a starting 22. Tackles are valuable, and teams need them all the time. And it could be a situation where the Saints have this ideal situation where they get their choice of the litter outside of Joe Alt, or it could be a terrible situation where 4 of them are gone, and then they got to either take the guy or move back and or address another position, which that's the beautiful part about the draft, and that's the gut-wrenching part of being pick number 14. And the Saints go on that run at the end of the year, and they push themselves out of the top 10, and now they could potentially be in a position where their top choices are off the board.
It's going to be a long couple of hours between picks 3 and 13.
Yeah.
The Saints. They're going to have to wait a long time.
How cool is that, though, that Caleb Williams and Fashanu played on the same high school team? I mean, has that ever happened?
Oh, I'm sure it has.
With 2
some of these high
top
schools
15
stockpile talent to the point where it probably has.
By the next
Clayton
pod,
Kershaw and Matthew Stafford.
Who?
Clayton Kershaw and Matthew Stafford. 2 different sports.
All right. I don't know if I've ever seen that. Like a left tackle and a quarterback.
And his
2
starting
premier.
I don't know. I feel like everyone goes to IMG Academy, so I'll just
Yeah,
assume.
That's true.
JJ McCarthy and JC Latham were teammates. at
Right.
IMG.
There you go.
Yeah,
go.
but
That
was
could
like
be two more.
That's like a
That's a factory.
That's a football factory. That doesn't count. It doesn't count in purposes. But no, what I
These
would
Southern California schools are football factories too.
But what I would say, what Luke was getting at, I think is a very good point, is that these other teams, like if the Atlanta Falcons are kind of a wild card team to me, and it would not shock me. I know everybody's like, oh, they got to get a pass rush. They got to get a pass rush. It wouldn't shock me if they looked at these defensive guys that all have question marks. I mean, most top 10 overall prospects, there's no defensive guys at all. So if you're the Falcons, they may be saying the same thing that we're saying about the Saints, and that is, let's just get the best player and let's take an offensive lineman, because we know they're, for the most part, offensive linemen are safe picks, and they just take the best tackle on the board. I mean, that wouldn't shock me at all, and say we'll dress our edge rusher at a lower level where you know we can have a little more margin for error. And I think that's the key to this whole thing, is those teams, you know, once we get past the quarterbacks and the wide receivers, what do they think? And do they say we're not sold on, you know, Quinyon Mitchell? We don't, you know, we're not
Turner.
sold on him, but we think this tackle is going to be a starting guy for us for the next decade. Let's take him and worry about the other position later.
Well, we're just over a week away from the NFL draft. We'll have a couple more shows. Next one coming on Friday, and then we'll have our big final mock, final thoughts next week, Tuesday or Wednesday. Our NFL draft coverage is brought to you by Tulane Doctors. Subscribe to the Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel. Leave 2 comments between April the 10th and April the 25th, and you're eligible for our NFL draft giveaway. And we will see you on Friday. For Matthew Paras, Luke Johnson, Jeff Duncan, our producer and offensive line expert, Norman Bell, I'm Zach Ewing, and we'll see you next time on Saints Insider.